Today's lesson 3.5 is absolute value. It's found on page 119 of your book. Our essential question is, how can you find and interpret the absolute value of rational numbers? The absolute value of a number is the number's distance from 0 on a number line. The absolute value of -3 is 3. Distance, the whole lesson, this is the whole lesson in a nutshell. Distance is always positive. The absolute value of any number is always positive. All right, the absolute value of -3 is written symbolically as -3 surrounded by these two bars. So anytime you see these two bars, you know that you're talking about absolute value. And any number, the absolute value of any number is always positive. All right, here we go. In 1934, a cargo ship called the Mohican sank off the coast of Florida. Divers today can visit the ship at an elevation of -32 feet, so that's below sea level. Use a number to find the absolute value of -32. So first we're going to graph -32. So this is -30, this is -40, so this would be -35. So -32 is going to be right about there, between -30 and -35. Think, the distance from 0 to the point I graphed. So how many units did you count down from 0? 10, 20, 30, 31, 32. You counted 32. So the absolute value of -32 is 32. Distance is always positive. All right, let's keep going with this. The depth of a diver is her distance below sea level. Because depth represents a distance, it is never, notice this word, negative. Find the depth of a diver visiting the Mohican and explain how her depth is related to the ship's elevation of -32 feet. Okay, so the diver is at a depth of 32 feet. She's 32 feet deep in the water. So that is the absolute value. Sorry, that's a U. The absolute value of the ship's elevation. Notice the apostrophe there shows ownership, elevation. All right. Explain how the expression, the absolute value, that's how you read this word here, this mathematical word. Explain how the expression, the absolute value of -32 relates to the diver's depth. All right. The diver's depth include that apostrophe, is the distance from sea level. Sea level is the surface of the water. So from the surface of the water or sea level to -32 feet. I think we're working in feet, right? Yes, feet. Had to look back at the original story problem to find our unit of measure. which is equal to the absolute value of 32. Distance is always positive. Distance is always positive. That's the one thing that I've been teaching this lesson for years, and we forget sometimes. We think it might be the opposite, but it's not. It's always positive. Okay, here we go. You can find the absolute values of decimals, fractions, and other rational numbers just as you found the absolute value of integers. Absolute value can be any number, rational or integers. It's just always positive. All right. A food scientist tested a new dog food on 5 dogs. Each dog weight was monitored during the course of the test. The results are shown in the table over here. Positive values indicate weight gains in pounds. Negative values indicate weight losses in pounds. So Buck gained weight, Goldie lost weight. See that negative symbol? She lost some weight. Graph the weight changes on the number line, then find their absolute values. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is graph these. So 3/4, positive 3/4 is right there. That's a Buck. Is he the only B? Yeah, so that's Buck. Goldie lost some weight. And 5/8 is pretty close to a half. We're going to put Goldie right there. Negative 1 7/16 is pretty close to a half, but not quite. So that's going to go right there. And that's mackerel. All right. Paloma gained some weight. So Paloma's right about here. And Spike lost some weight, not quite half a pound. So right about there is where Spike goes. All right, so we've got our numbers graphed. All right, think. The distance from 0 to the point 1 graphed is 3/4. So they're talking about this one. So the absolute value of 3/4 equals 3/4. All right. The absolute value of negative 5/8, that's Goldie here. This distance is 5/8. The absolute value is positive 5/8. But notice that this was positive also, but it stays positive, because the absolute value of every number is always positive. So the absolute value of negative 1 7/8 is positive 1/16. Positive 1 7/16. The absolute value of 2, this is a positive number, is also positive. Distance is always positive. The absolute value of negative 3/8 is positive 3/8. Okay, so interpret a result. Explain how the absolute values of the positive and negative weight changes relate to the starting weights of the dogs. Okay, so the absolute value of the negative weight changes represent losses from the starting weights. The absolute values of the positive weight changes represent gains from the starting point, zero being our starting point.